To order, acknowledging first of all that in Ottawa, we meet on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the motion adopted on June 1st, 2021, and following the discovery of the remains of 215 Indigenous children buried on the site of the former Kamloops Residential School, the committee holds its meeting on Truth and Reconciliation Commission Calls to Action 7276. To ensure an orderly meeting, once again, participants, ensure that you have selected the language of your choice on the interpretation globe, bottom center of your screen. If you do switch in speaking, there's no need to make a further technical adjustment. And when speaking, ensure your video is turned on. Please speak slowly and clearly. Not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With us this first hour are the following department officials. From Department of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, Deputy Minister Daniel Kwan Watson, Assistant Deputy Minister Martin Rare, and Director General Christy Caron. From Department of Indigenous Services, Associate Deputy Minister Valerie Gideon. Thank you all for taking the time. And we will begin with opening statements followed by our usual rounds of questioning. So who would like to begin with our official group?
If I might, Mr. Chair.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Kwekwe, ulukut, tansi, hello, and bonjour. Mr. Chair, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton today, traditional territory for many Indigenous peoples, and in particular the Cree, Saulteaux, Niitsitapi, Blackfoot, Métis, and Nakota Sioux. I'm supported by my senior officials from the department, as well as by my colleague, Associate Deputy Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, Valerie Gideon, who will be available to answer questions on many mental health and other health supports. J'aimerais commencer par rendre hommage aux survivants.
I would like to start by paying tribute to survivors of residential schools, their families and communities, and to acknowledge the ongoing impact of intergenerational trauma. Today, our hearts are with the Kamloops and people, survivors, families, and Indigenous communities across Turtle Island as they grieve the loss of these innocent children. Tragically, the gravesite of Kamloops is not an isolated case. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission documented more than 4,100 deaths of residential school students across the country. There are other known cases of unmarked graves across the country, and many more, thousands even, will be located. This is the grim reality of residential schools. As we reflect on this loss, we must acknowledge that this is not a historic event. There are parents who are still living who lost children, maybe even amongst those in Kamloops.
Brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, and other family members who will be wondering if their loved ones are among those who have been located. We are resolved to follow the wishes of communities and offer support as needed to those affected to memorialize those innocent souls. The recent events in Kamloops remind us about the importance of acknowledging the legacy of residential schools and their tragic impact on First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. It is difficult to imagine the pain suffered by so many Indigenous children, their families, and communities. It is said that one of the children found at the Kamloops Residential School may have been as young as 3 years old. A life that was stolen and likely buried without a proper ceremony. It's disturbing, and it should never have happened, but it has. Many students who went to residential school never returned. They were lost to their family. They died at rates that were far higher than those experienced by the general school-age population. Their parents were often not informed of their sickness and death. They were buried away from their families in long neglected graves. Although it is painful, we need to continue to search for answers. Canadians have a responsibility to know the history and legacy of residential schools and to honor residential schools survivors, their families, and communities. Archaeological and historic research was conducted about potential grave sites and cemeteries at former residential school sites across Canada in advance of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings. All available federal related records were turned over to the TRC. The National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation now houses the reports on the deaths of students. As technology evolves, it is likely that other burial sites will be uncovered. Il est essentiel de déterminer.
Identifying burial locations of children who died while attending residential schools is fundamental to providing closure for families. Significant progress is being made with the Truth and Reconciliation's 94 calls to action. Approximately 80% of the calls to action under the sole or shared responsibility of the federal government are completed or well underway. We know we can do better. Indeed, we must. Collectively, we must chart a new path toward a Canada that honors, respects, and is fully inclusive for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, with renewed relationships that is fundamental to the growth and prosperity of our country. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And are we going to hear further? We can move to our questioning now? That's great. And just before we start, I'd like to point out to our guests that the picture behind me is a sculpture located in Stony Creek Battlefield Park called The Eagles Among Us. It's the work of First Nations artist David General, dedicated to healing and reconciliation. On Monday, a vigil was held at that site for the 215 children, with pairs of shoes filling the sculpture base in memory of the lost children. Throughout the current pandemic, we were saddened by the reality of people, especially the elderly, passing away with no loved ones near to comfort them. Imagine the fate of these children in a strange place, being overcome by illnesses, dependent on strangers to ease their suffering, if indeed any were there, tears in their eyes, all alone, feeling unloved as the darkness of death overcame them. So we are here today in part to tell their spirits that they are loved, they are watching us, and we can't let them down. And with that, I'm going to welcome Kathy McLeod back to our committee, who's done so much great work here, as the first questioner in the round of questionings. Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I'm going to start with the words of Kupki Casimir, the chief. And what she said is, to the Prime Minister of Canada and all federal parties, we acknowledge your gestures, but as a community who's burdened with the legacy of a federally mandated Indian residential school, Canada must face ownership and accountability to Kamloops to Secwépemc, as well as all communities and families. So I'm going to go back. In 2015, this government committed to all 94 calls to action. They put dollars aside in 2019, of which very limited amounts have been spent. And both the government and the AFN report cards indicate limited to moderate progression on this particular issue. So I'm going to ask some very specific questions for the community that I represent, and I have to hold them up. The leadership, the strength that they have shown has been incredible, and we just appreciate so much, again, the leadership that has been shown. So calls to action, I'm going to start with number 73, and I'm going to ask specifically what has happened in the community. I'll shorten it to TTS, as they often do. What have you done in terms of call to action 73? We call upon the federal government to work with churches, Aboriginal communities, and former residential school students to establish and maintain an online registry of school cemeteries, including where possible plot maps. So again, specific to the community that I represent, where this horrific discovery of 215 children were found, what have you done on call to action 73 with them?
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for that question, and thank you for your ongoing work on this, particularly close to the community that you represent. So in action, the call to action 73, we have taken a number of steps. We have made some investments. Obviously, it's a national approach dealing with all of the 131 sites that we know of, and certainly the 55 across the country where there are known burial sites, but it'll be available specifically for Kamloops. And I'll get my colleague Martin Rière to speak to the specific investments that we have done on the online registry, which is...
No, I'm talking for Kamloops specifically. So have you done anything in terms of their plots? I know that Chief Casimir indicated that she hadn't seen any support come through on any of these calls to action. So maybe there's some national work going on, but after 6 years, you would think the biggest residential school in the country would have had some direct conversation, some direct engagement, and some direct work. It's been 6 years. So again, specifically to this community, have dollars flown, have conversations been had, have meetings been had? Have you listened to their direction? Because I understand that it was a provincial grant that got them to where they were, so they had to struggle to get a provincial grant. It wasn't federal dollars.
Sure. Well, I'm pleased to be able to report that it was, in fact, a federal grant. It came from Canadian Heritage. It was part of their celebration and commemoration fund. It was approximately $40,000. The grant is available online, and you can find the details of it there. But it was, in fact, the federal government, and it's a result of a direct engagement between a federal department and the ban on that very specific site. And so it was, in fact, federal monies. That program was established as part of the overall response of the government to the TRC recommendations, and it was done specifically to ensure that this particular site in Kamloops at that school was found. And so the work that has been done was, in fact, the result of those conversations with the federal government, the federal department, based on federal investments.
So I know my time is going to run out too quickly. If we could have a summary to this committee in terms of calls to action 73 to 76 and what direct engagement, what direct dollars have flown. And as we're speaking, my next question is actually from Chief Casimir. She's asked, do you commit and promise to respect the policies, laws, and protocols of this community as you move forward unreservedly?
I can say that unreservedly. And in fact, the consultation that we did about how the money should be spent got exactly that reaction across the country from every single Indigenous group that we had. We were frequently told that it was the Crown's fault that those children were there, and that we needed to respect now the fact that it was the Indigenous community's role to decide what to do with what was found. So yes, unreservedly, I can commit to what you've suggested.
Chair, do I have a little time still?
You got one minute. Go ahead.
So in summary, do you also commit specifically to TTS sending to this committee everything that has been done in terms of calls to action 73 through to 76?
We will provide a full report of what we have done, yes.
Including
in relation to this particular First Nation and any other information that might be wanted by the committee.
Okay, so I think I will be pleased to let them know because those are some of the things they're concerned about, and from their perspective have not felt that there's been much movement on 73 to 76. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And Adam Van Couverden, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to the officials who have joined us here today to share your insight and perspective with us. It's so important that Canadians know and hear from you as we are navigating this together. All Canadians from coast to coast to coast are shaken and upset and distraught with this discovery of the remains of 215 children. The loss to the families that have these memories, it's reverberating across the country, certainly in British Columbia and Kamloops, but certainly across the country as well, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. Yesterday, we heard that 27 million was made available, which was first allocated in 2019 to support this ongoing work from Call to Action 74, which calls, as my colleague mentioned, on the federal government to work with churches and Indigenous community leaders to inform families of children, to respond to families with appropriate commemoration ceremonies. This is heartbreaking work. This is tragic work. I'm also glad to hear that there was some federal funding utilized in this discovery. Thank you for highlighting that. My question is to whoever would like to take it. Can you explain to the committee why the funding for this very important initiative was delayed? And do we believe that $27 million will be enough to support hurting communities across the country to continue this important work?
I'd be happy to take that, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. In Budget 2019, as was noted, this money was made available. One of the things that was very important, we knew at the time, was that with something as sensitive as this issue, that it not be something that the federal government simply decide in its own office spaces exactly what to do. There will be many different approaches that Indigenous communities want to deal with this. It's important to remember that while even the Kamloops school is situated in Kamloops, those children were taken sometimes from hundreds of kilometers away. And one of the things that many Indigenous communities have reminded us again and again and again is they will not disturb other communities' ancestors' remains without engaging properly with them. And how to deal with these issues is very sensitive. We know that there are some communities that have told us already they intend simply to memorialize the location and not to do further work. There will be other instances where people want to do deep forensic work, or at least work that resembles forensic work for different reasons. And we knew that it was our job to listen to what they had to say. We knew it was our job not to repeat the mistakes that had been in the past that in fact led to many of these situations by government simply making its own decisions about what it thought was best. And so we did conduct a consultation process. As you can imagine, many of the people that we most needed to speak to were those with living memory of the schools. Many of those are elders. Many of those consultations do not work well in the format that we're using today. And so there were delays as a result of COVID-19 because many of the people we need to talk to don't have either the technical ability or frankly the internet access to do this type of work. But we did conduct that consultation and we did come up with the approach that was announced yesterday. And at the core of that is very much along the lines of what your colleague just asked about in their final question, which is, will we respect the wishes of Indigenous groups and what they want to do and want not to do? And we got a universal message that that's what they were asking us, and we will do that.
Thank you, Mr. Kwan-Watson. And on that, my second question was building on that. There have been calls across the country to investigate and search the grounds of every former residential school, and that forensic work begin immediately. But there have also been very, very important calls from Indigenous communities that all of this work needs to be community-led, needs to be community-informed. Those decisions need to be guided by the communities in question, the families in question, and the people who it will impact emotionally, physically, and personally in such profound ways. Would anybody like to comment on the importance of this work continuing to be community-led?
I'll just speak quickly to it. Again, there are many living relatives of some of the people who died at these schools, brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, in some instances, parents. So the idea that the Crown would go in against their wishes to begin work, I think is something that we would reject outright. But where they want that work done, we would definitely support it. But it was, again, at the core of the consultations that we heard, and perhaps my colleague, Monsieur Rière, could speak quickly to the key messages that he heard when he was managing those consultations.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Deputy. Indeed, we heard that this work is extremely complex and very difficult to do, building relationship based on respect, trust, and developing partnership with communities will be paramount. Indian Regional Schools add students from multiple communities, as the Deputy mentioned, so it will be important to be inclusive and inclusive of all impacted communities. It's important to ensure the process for memorialization and commemoration are community-led, culturally appropriate, based on ceremony, respect protocols, and focus on helping families acknowledge their loved ones. We also heard that this initiative will put those impacted by the legacies of Indian Regional Schools at risk of re-traumatizing, and it's important to include trauma-informed practices. And we heard loudly that CERNAC must respect and follow the information governance protocols that community have in place, and the family wishes to ensure that we have the appropriate balance between family healing, privacy, and the desire to let Canadians know about this tragic situation.
Thank you so much. And, Madam Berube, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I represent BB James riding, Ashniba, and we're all afflicted by this terrible discovery that happened over the weekend. I'm thinking about the families and the communities that have been touched by this tragedy, and today we simply want to try and understand together. My question, in the 2019 budget, there was 33.8 million that was to go into funding into the calls of actions of the TRC. However, the reality, it would seem that the announced funds is not for the essential items. I'd just like to know exactly why. So is it because it was blocked at the Treasury Board level, or did it block because there were other projects that were going ahead? Mr. Chair, if you will allow me. Thank you very much for that question. Well, I wouldn't say that the monies were blocked, but it was simply that we haven't spent the money without knowing how the communities in question wanted those monies spent. The communities have said that the source of the problem was that the government would make decisions in the time of the residential schools, and when we're now looking about dealing with this tragic situation, that the government should go ahead with decisions. So this was meant that there had to be consultations to see how the communities, the Indigenous communities, wanted to go ahead, and we've acted on basis of what we've heard so far. I'm sorry, we can't hear you, Madam. I'm sorry. The Toronto Star has also told us that there was research that was done with respect to this Kamloops discovery, and it was provincial funds and not federal funds that went into this research. Well, I'd like to confirm that the federal heritage. The Department of Heritage monies, these monies were, you can see that the funding is, you can find it online. I think there was a $40,000 grant that was given that responded to the calls for action of the TRC. Question, Mr. Chair, last December, and this is, I got a response, a written response with respect to 81 and 82 number calls to action, and that there was 0.5 full-time equivalents who were involved in this call to action number 82, where there's a question of creating a memorial for victims of residential schools. So wouldn't you say that is not enough to respond to this call to action? Answer. I would like to ask my colleague, Madame Caron, if she can tell us exactly where we're at with the call to action number 81 and 82.
In front of me, but we can commit to providing a written response to the committee.
Jussi.
I also have an excerpt from the response of the government with respect to the designation of sites following funding that has been given to construct this monument, that it would be probable that a national monument would be built on federal site. What site was selected or was foreseen at this point? So can I say that the government really doesn't expect to see any type of construction of a monument for the victims? Answer: we will be able to give you a written answer with all of the details, but I can tell you that there's something that will be done within the National Capital Region, and often there's no need to purchase land, and sometimes it's the monument that costs more than or the land would cost more than the monument itself, but we can and that could create an obstacle to accomplishing what we expect to accomplish. Question: with everything that's going on right now and the budgets that you have mentioned that were announced in 2019 and what's ongoing now, and what would you forecast for funding in terms of helping the communities? Answer: the minister has announced a 27 million that was available, and has made a commitment also to be able to use more resources if need be. So it's very clear that there will be a response to what is decided by the communities across the countries, where there are different approaches used, some much more in depth, and so though within those communities the decisions will be made, and so there may be more modest investments that are made, even if the result would be as important as any other project that these communities would be engaging in across the country.
And move on now to Ms. Blaney for 6 minutes. Rachel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone for being here to testify. I just want to start off by saying that I think it's important for all of us to recognize that what we're seeing across Canada and Indigenous communities is not a call for remembrance or commemoration. It's a call to acknowledge genocide and to acknowledge that there are crime scenes across our Canada, that there are graves of children across our country, of Indigenous children. So I just want to acknowledge that as we start, or as I start my questioning. So my first question is, how many nations is the department currently working with to identify possible burial sites?
Thank you for the question. And if I could just pick up quickly on the first point that you made, I think some of the most heart-wrenching conversations I've had in the last week are from Indigenous people who are frustrated at the reaction of Canadians from the perspective. They said 6 years ago, this issue was laid bare in black and white for every Canadian to read. Why is it a surprise now? And I would just pick up on the comment that you made there. So we are working with every community that wishes to engage on this issue. We have made communication to every single community in the country. It's on our website. We'll be sending out an email blast to everybody, and we are prepared to work with anyone on this front. It is their choice. These are very difficult conversations, as you can imagine, and many communities have in their priorities things that are not related to these issues at this moment in time, and we will respect the timeframes in which they want to raise them and whether or not they want to raise them, but we are open to working with everyone. And again, there are a number of communities where we're having specific conversations, but we're open to working with absolutely everyone.
So Justice Sinclair has told the world that when he started this process, when he was part of that committee, they didn't expect the amount of stories that they received of people talking about survivors talking about children killed, children who died, children who never returned. They weren't sure what happened to them, indicating very clearly that there was something serious happening here that we should be looking into. And of course, that wasn't studied the way that it should have been. I'm just wondering if you could tell us about how many requests the department has received, how many have been dismissed, and how many have been followed up with, and if the stories of survivors is enough for an investigation.
I think, and I'll ask my colleague Martin Riel to speak to some of the specifics and the requests that we've had. I'm not aware that we have denied any requests from different groups that might have come forward to us. Obviously, we were waiting for the money. We expect many requests to come in now that it's out there. The groups that we work with have known that this money is coming. They were waiting for the details of it. It's now out there. And you're quite right, obviously, that these stories have been told many times. And I think one of the reasons that people had stopped talking about them is that parents had gone and asked school administrators. Parents had gone and talked to police forces throughout history. People had asked all sorts of government agents what had happened to their children. They were ignored time and time and time again. Some instances they were lied to. Some instances documents were withheld that should have been given to them. And so people got to the point where they didn't talk about it publicly. And as you point out, it came out in significant volume during the hearings process. But perhaps my colleague, Mr. Rier, could speak to the engagements we have where people have sought resources to this point.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you for the question. So indeed, we have not denied any request for funding. We are actually keeping track of the requests that we have received in the last few days in particular, and we'll follow up with the First Nations, in addition, of course, to making available the information to present requests in the future. The second part of the question was with respect to what survivors had to say and whether that is sufficient to launch the work. And obviously, the information that survivors recall and have shared is critical as a starting point for that type of work. Additional work will be required, historical research, archaeological research, obviously, in order to locate potential burial grounds. And
thank you.
that
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just have a few seconds left. My last question is just that, are there support systems that are going to be available for communities should a site be identified? We need to see trauma-informed care given on site for elders, knowledge keepers, community members, survivors, and their families. And I'm just wondering if those resources are also part of this package.
Briefly.
If I could turn to my colleague Valerie Gideon. Yeah.
So I can speak to that. So in budget 2021, we were able to obtain renewal of the Indian Residential School Health Support Program to continue to extend those mental health and cultural supports to communities across the country until 2024. There are additional mental health resources also that were included. So the total is close to $600 million over 3 years. And that's in addition to the other base programming that we have in the department, such as non-insured health benefits.
Thanks very much. Members of the committee, the departmental staff, of course, are available if we're not able to complete all of our inquiries. We can certainly write for written submissions back. But in view of the impending hour ahead of us, which features the commissioners from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I'm going to ask that we take one more question from each of our parties on the committee and allow us to have just a few minutes prior to noon to make sure that our next set of witnesses are connected and ready to go, because we also have a hard stop at 1 o'clock, which we won't be able to extend. So Unless someone wishes to challenge, I will now go to Mr. Schmale. Jamie, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, witnesses. Out of the calls to action in the TRC report, how many have been completed so far?
We estimate that approximately 80% of those for which the federal government is solely or in partnership responsible for have been either completed or substantially completed. An example of substantially complete would be, or at least well underway, I think is a terminology used, would be an example of C15, where the consultations have been done. It has been presented to Parliament, it's being considered, but of course we can't say it's completed until the final step is there. But that would be something that we would consider to be well underway.
Okay, how many fully completed?
I'll ask my colleague, Madame Carin, to speak to the specifics there.
Certainly, thank you, Deputy. I can say that of the 76 calls to action that are under federal or shared responsibility, 16 have been completed.
Thank you. Has recommendation number 2 been completed? Which calls about it's to do with child welfare.
And perhaps I could turn to my colleague, Madame Gideon.
Yeah, so I would say that with the introduction of federal legislation specific to the exercise of jurisdiction from First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, we are currently at the stage of implementation of the legislation in co-development with Indigenous partners.
Okay, thank you. In regards to calls to action 6 to 12 to do with education, is the government using any data to demonstrate the progress towards closing the funding gap for the educational needs of Indigenous children on reserves? And if yes, is there a way to access or see that data?
We can certainly provide the committee with the increases, the significant increases in education funding based on the new national education formula for K-12 that was developed with First Nations. And we can certainly demonstrate that to you over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, depending on the committee's request.
Perfect. Is it easily accessible? Like in terms of would a member from the public being able to easily access this?
Well, we do produce our annual report at the departmental level and our departmental results report, which offers some of that financial information. So in addition, like in our response, we can also point to you to where there are public sources of that information. But we don't provide publicly like every community's specific breakdown of their education funding, for example.
Okay, in regards to calls to action 72 to 76, specifically, I know you touched on it a bit, not you specifically. I have Ms. Gideon on the screen, so I don't, when I say you, I don't mean you, just the person on the screen. The department, how's that? What is the process, and I just wasn't clear, I know you touched on it, but what is the process for communities to access funds to conduct searches?
I'll let my colleague, Monsieur Rayard, speak to the specifics there.
Thank you, Deputy, and thank you for the question. So there is an email address that was made public yesterday where requests can be sent, and we will engage with the requesters in order to discuss with them what they want to accomplish, develop a plan, and determine the funding that will be provided.
Okay, so prior to this, what was the process? Was it as easy as that?
This department did not have resources available explicitly for that type of work, or we put in place this program. As was indicated, we wanted to first deal with Call to Action 72 and engage on how best to address Call to Action 74 to 76, which we have done and now we are implementing.
And if I could just add briefly to that, we are pleased that it looks like about 4,100 of the estimate of 6,000 students that had died or disappeared now have a place in the records that are being kept by the National Council on Reconciliation. And so that is something that we think is an important step forward. Clearly more work to be done. Former Senator Sinclair, who's been mentioned, has obviously spoken to the records that still need to go there. We support very much that work being done. That's an important part of this piece as well.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Pawlowski, please go ahead.
Yeah, hello, thanks. So I listened to a statement by Senator Sinclair about the Kamloops discovery. One of the things he stated was that when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was having its hearings, and I guess at the end it requested more money to look specifically into deaths in residential schools, and that was denied. I know this was a number of years ago, but can you say why that was denied, and would the government and the ministry reconsider this should the Indigenous community want to do it at this point?
I'm not able to speak to the details of why the decision might have been made at that point in time. I know that obviously the request was made and that the decision was made not to provide the funds. Certainly, this issue is one that we're committed to addressing, resolving. There's a significant amount of resources that is available to deal with it. The minister is committed that she's prepared to seek more resources if they are required, and certainly we would entertain seriously any request in this area. That
now, Deputy Minister, you've already kind of touched upon this. Senator Sinclair has also talked about lists, and I've heard from other sources as well that quite a few people seem to believe the church kept very good records, that there are lists out there as to the names of people who died. Does the government have such a list, and what, if anything, has the government done to try to get a hold of such lists?
The federal government has turned over all of the documents that we have and made those available. So those are part of the records that are currently being held. If other parties have the lists that haven't been shared, obviously they would be in their possession, not our possession. If they had been in our possession, we would have turned them over. We are certainly strongly encouraging, along with the former commissioner and the report of the commission, the call to make sure that that information is shared. And perhaps Monsieur Rière can speak a bit about the communications we've had on that front. There was obviously a take note debate the other evening that addressed some aspects of related issues here. But these are some conversations that we've been having with a number of players over the years to strongly encourage them to do as the federal government has done and to turn over the records.
If Mr. Rière wants to respond, but maybe in responding also, you can answer does the government have any legal power to require the other parties, such as the churches, to hand over any lists that they have?
Thank you for the question. So as part of the implementation of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, we had established an all-party table involving churches. And we have continued discussion with churches in the development of the response to calls to action 74 to 76. And as part of these discussions, they have all indicated around the table that they are prepared to collaborate and share the information in their archives. We will continue to facilitate the sharing of this information in the context of specific projects, and I anticipate that there will be great collaboration. In terms of legal capacity to impose the sharing, we do not have that authority.
No, I realize that a lot of these children died a lot of years ago. Has there really been nothing in all those years in terms of attempts to investigate this before? I think we're obviously in chapter 22 of a long story. Really, did no previous governments, no Indigenous services, did they never make an attempt to get to the bottom of finding out names and to notifying families? And
there have over time been a number of efforts made, not as coordinated, not on a national scale as this. For example, there have been known situation in Regina where there was a quote unquote discovery, and I think that's a loaded word in this context, because many of Indigenous communities would say, we told you all along that people were there. It is of note that when the Kamloops band went and looked, they only looked in one place. They didn't have to look all over. They knew exactly where to go. They went to that one spot. And so there have been many instances where we have found, well, I shouldn't say we, where remains have been found, 55 sites out of the 131 so far. But it has not been done on as organized a basis as this. Even at Kamloops, there was work done in the 1990s originally, or at least most recently prior to the events of this past week and this past year. So, yes, work has been done.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We'll move quickly along to Madame Bérubé, 2.5. Please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yesterday, the Prime Minister, in the question period, and I quote, he said, in 2019, we investigated $33.8 million but into the calls to action 70 to 78. But we can see that there has been additional funds added in 2020 and 2021. So my question, would you recognize that it's how do you explain the difference there? Well, thank you very much for the question, and it's important to be sure that the investments were done in the way that the communities wished. So we consulted with the communities, and we did national consultations, and these were very difficult discussions. Of course, we're talking here about deaths, the death of children, and so there is really a lot of trauma around that. But we went ahead with those consultations, and the objective was so that once we came to the point where we would make an announcement, it would respect the wishes of the communities, and that's why it took time. And if there hadn't been COVID-19, if there hadn't been the pandemic, I think things would have gone much more quickly. And I think it was very important to speak to the elders, those who had experienced the residential school era. And so even there's a question of technology, and even with high-speed internet, that had an impact. It took, and COVID-19 slowed things down also. We're also the Crown Indigenous Relations Minister said we have made a commitment, but it was important to get into the details with Treasury Board to be able to explain how the funds would be distributed. The approval arrived, and now we're able to go ahead and make an immediate distribution. So do I need to understand that the $33.8 million have not been spent, and it's because the department was blocked by the Treasury Board? Could you also explain that situation? Answer. It's because we had to knock on the door of the communities to see what they wanted. And once we knew their wishes, the Treasury Board responded immediately.
Ms. Blaney, to finish, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just going to start off by saying that I am having a little bit of confusing feelings about hearing again and again, it should always be nation-led. I 100% agree with that. But we're asking communities that are dealing with huge grief, who are already in their communities dealing with the realities in their communities. They are largely underfunded to do the services that they need to do, just to provide basic things for their communities. And now we're asking them to guide us on how to deal with the genocide perpetrated against them by the Canada and the churches. So yes, I think it's important, but I don't have an answer for that, but I want to put my discomfort on the record that communities that are dealing with all the things that they're dealing with are now being told, on top of that, we're going to send you an email and you let us know what you want to do. It's pretty hard when you're grieving the fact. I mean, this has triggered people who are survivors, who are the children and grandchildren of survivors. And I think part of the reasons it triggered them is because they've heard these stories generation after generation of the survivors saying, we saw these things happen, but when we told, nobody cared. This is genocide. Canada has to own this and stop asking Indigenous communities to carry the bag. This is Canada's genocide against them. So I just want to put that on the record. I'm just so frustrated right now. So if I could just hear from you a specific two questions. What's the timeline between a nation or community coming forward and people arriving on the site to do the investigation? And what is the capacity with Indigenous communities? And how is it being built up to do these inspections themselves without having a third party come in to do it for them?
As quickly as we can, and I'm sorry about that. Go ahead.
Sure. In terms of the time it'll take, that will depend on what the communities ask for, because it could be a broad range of things. We'll be there to support them immediately. There will be health supports that have been made available already to deal with some of the immediate issues. And we will get the funding out as quickly as is possible to support the things that they ask for.
I'm going to, sadly, because of the reasons explained, suspend the meeting in just a moment. I want to thank our departmental staff for their attendance today. And certainly, I'm sure that you'll be able to fill in any blanks that were left from the lack of time that we have. So thank you once again. This meeting is temporarily suspended. Algonquin people. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the motion adopted on April 29, 2021, following the discovery of the remains of 215 Indigenous children buried on the site of the former Kamloops Residential School. The committee is holding this meeting on Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action 72 to 76. Once again, participants, choose your language on that globe in the bottom center of the screen, English, French, or either one. Once you've chosen that, if you change your speech language to French or English, that you don't have to make any further adjustments. So make sure your video is turned on and your camera is on, and mute your microphone when you are not speaking. So we are waiting for the former chair, the Honorable Murray Sinclair, but with us now, the former Commissioner, Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, Wilton Littlechild, and former Commissioner Marie Wilson, along with Stephanie Scott, Executive Director of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, in the meeting room now. And Mr. Littlechild, would you please go ahead? And thank you for joining us today.
Authentic, Nigan. Minanaskimog, Semanto, Seminapego, Yehinamaguak, Atexgak, we are swoon.
Point d'ordre, excusez, je n'entends pas la traduction, je m'excuse.
I believe Mr. Littlechild is speaking in his language.
Please continue, Willie.
Willie, Mr. Littlechild, please go ahead.
I was acknowledging and thanking you for this great, although very sad moment, for you to call a special session where we can recognize and uplift the spirit of the child's life, which in our culture is very important. My name is Walking Wolf from the Muskogee Cree territory. And I want to thank you, first of all, again, for calling this special session. I want to draw us back right to our first report as a commission that we made. And we concluded very early from the stories that we were hearing that this was a direct assault. The Indigenous residential school policy, or the Indian residential school policy, was an assault on our languages, on our families, on our communities, and very importantly, on our spirituality. So I want to talk about that in a way that the impact of this finding has on families and communities from the perspective of not only our traditional laws, our customary laws, our sacred laws, especially in terms of the practice that have when we lose someone in our community. I want to begin with a story about my own grandfather, Maikant Moteo, whose name I bear now. At an epidemic as a chief, had to bury 33 members of the Ermineskin Cree Nation in one day when he was a chief. So that obligation was passed down to my mother and then now to me to help our community at times of grief and mourning like we are today. Also, I wanted to remind us that in our history, and we saw many graveyards during our journey as a commission, where the gravesite is outside the graveyard because the person may have been a young person from the school, had committed suicide, and they were not allowed to be buried within the graveyard. I want to point that out also because when I was in residential school, 3 of them for over 14 years, when I was 10 and 12, I lost both of my grandparents, who actually were the ones who raised me. But I was not allowed to go to their funeral. So I didn't have a chance to say farewell to my grandmother, my grandfather. So now I do through this opportunity. The other thing I want to point out is, as a commission, we always had an empty seat beside us. And I have an empty seat beside me now. And we would call in the child spirit to come and join us at the hearing, to guide us, to pray with us, and just to be with us, to support us. And then after the hearing, we would send the spirit free again to go back to the place of forever happiness, as our old people often call it. I want to also reflect on our own repatriation here of 17 bodies from a residential school. And all that was marked on the coffin was 9-year-old girl or 12-year-old boy. And there's one particular one that had 6-year-old boy. And I chose to carry that coffin to the graveyard after our ceremonies, because that's how old I was when I was taken to residential school. So we had a traditional ceremony. By that, I mean we had a wake. We sang our 16 traveling songs. We had our pipe ceremony. We had our elders speak to us during the wake. And also we had our last giveaway feast. These are traditional ceremonies about not only ceremony, but a part of our laws that we need to do as Indigenous peoples when we lose someone from our community. And the hardest one is always when you lose a child. So we were able to do that. And then after that, we have a memorial for 4 years after the burial, on the day of the burial. So I just wanted to mention that this was lost to these families of 215 children and more. In my own community, the 17 I mentioned, also there were 4 little skeletons that were found in the old school when it was being taken down. So it hits me home because our school at one time was also the largest in Canada, with over 500 students from all different parts of the province. I want to thank the leaders here in my community, the elders who had a memorial service, and we've been having prayer ceremonies every day since we heard this news. Because one of the Mayan prophecies is that spirituality has to come back to leadership. And I mentioned that of 4 prophecies that they made recently. And I want to thank the Deputy Minister, Kwan Watson, because I know the previous witness, he follows this with respect, the teaching in his work. So in conclusion, I want to remind us of the sacred teachings. And in this case, the one I want to reflect on is the one about respect. And I heard earlier in the session that these must be community-led. And yesterday I was engaged with a United Nations conference on the coming decade for Indigenous languages. As you know, that was one of the ones that was assaulted as well. But in saying that, the suggestion was made that this not be Indigenous-led, but it should be Indigenous-driven, because the difference between the two words is that if it's Indigenous-driven, then you have a hand and can shape the outcomes that you desire in a good way, and that we need to respect that teaching as well. So, Akamemuk, continue the good work that you are doing. And as I did in our community, I ask everyone that's listening to pause for a moment and say a prayer for these children who now have a bright path going back to the sacred place of the ancestors. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and that's all I wanted to present at this point.
Before I go to Senator Sinclair, can we do a brief pause for the thoughts that you just expressed? Committee? I'm going to ask Mr. Sinclair. We're not sure that you're connected properly. Mr. Clerk, are we okay for technically with Mr. Sinclair?
I'll invite him to introduce himself and where he's calling in from, and I'll then be able to give feedback.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Is the connection working? I don't know.
That'll be sufficient. Thanks very much.
Right. Thank you. So would you like to go ahead now with your testimony, sir? Please go ahead.
All right. I apologize for connecting late because the technology and the connection information that I was given was not as full as it could have been. And therefore, I spent the last 25 minutes with your tech people trying to get into this forum with you. And I also apologize to my colleagues, Commissioner Littlechild and Commissioner Wilson, for missing anything that they may have already said, because it would have been good for us to have heard each other speak. I just want to just say that when I was invited to participate in this event, I debated with myself for a while, the better part of a day and a half or so, as to whether I wanted to participate with this or not. Mainly because I hate the possibility that something as significant as this and as personal as this and as triggering as this is could become a political football, or could become an issue that gets embraced in the political action that's going on in Ottawa. And I was pleased to see and hear that the Prime Minister and the leader of the official opposition have joined together to indicate that they're going to develop a plan about how to move forward on this. And I also want to commend each one of them has reached out to me to indicate they wish to talk about what that could entail. And I've advised my colleagues of that. But it is the fact that it also gets played out so publicly in the media that is both a good thing and a bad thing. And I've spoken about this before, that it's good for Canada to understand that we still have to come to terms with a lot of what occurred during the residential school era, and that there is still a lot of uncovered truths out there that we need to look at, and that this is one of them that we identified in the course of the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But at the same time, I recognize that this has been a huge trigger to the survivors. And I shut my phone off to all media requests, with the exception of one or two, but mainly because the number of media requests was significant, and it allowed the survivors to reach out to me. And I have to say that I probably have spoken with about 200 survivors who contacted me over the course of the last few days to express their reaction, their grief, their feelings of anger, their feelings of frustration, but also their huge emotion and their sense of depth of what they're looking at for themselves, that they're coming to terms with and trying to come to terms with. And the fact that there are very few, and in fact in most places now, no healing resource programs available to them is a huge chapter that unfortunately has ended with the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the commitment by the Government of Canada to provide healing centers and healing programs for survivors. It's one that I spoke about in a public statement that I issued this week, and I think that we really need to take that to heart. And I compared it to how different it was for Canada when it provided some services, some gathering services and resources for veterans of the Second World War when they returned, and that we ensured that they had places where they could gather and talk with each other, because nothing heals survivors more than other survivors, and they're now in great pain as a result of this story, and they will be in even more pain because as we go forward, I'm sure that we're going to discover additional places where bodies are buried, unmarked grave sites are found, and more information is going to come to light. So I begin with those thoughts. One of the questions that people in private conversations keep asking me is, what has the government been doing about this to this point in time? And I point to the calls to action that we issued, calls to action 71, I think, through to 75, in which we identified this as a major issue that needed to be done. The volume that we issued as part of the TRC's final report, Volume 4, identified the work that we were able to do in the course of the TRC, and that even with our limited amount of research that we did, we were able to safely say that we believe that there are several unknown burial sites that can be discovered and located with the use of proper geological researchers and experts. And Scott Hamilton, who did that work for us, has indicated that on the maps and the database that he was able to develop, where those sites he thinks currently are. And nothing has been done by the government to follow that up. And we think that that's a sad commentary upon the commitment the government has, or lack of commitment the government has to trying to close the story of what happened at residential schools, because despite the fact that it may not be important to some Canadians and maybe to government officials, it's of huge importance to residential school survivors and to the families of those who did not come back. When we were doing the work of the TRC and listening to testimony, we heard from many survivors who told us some horrendous stories about deaths at the school. We heard stories from survivors who talked about what they believe to be acts of murder, what they believe to be acts of negligence. And we were not able to test that in terms of looking behind the evidence and searching out further information. We simply allowed the survivors to tell their stories because we know that the depth of feeling they had about that and what they were telling us was a huge burden that they needed to have lifted and allow to have lifted from them. So we wanted them to have that opportunity. But in addition to that, we do know that there is additional information out there in the records that have been lost to the process because much of our information about what records might exist show that school records were destroyed and some were lost to floods or fires, but many were destroyed. That would tell us that information. We do know that the Bryce report disclosed, of course, the death rates in schools in Saskatchewan were somewhere between 25% in some schools in one school to 49% in another school. And that tells you that if that was the death rate in that era for those schools, if anything, even approaching that 25% continued to be the death rate in residential schools for any period of time, then that was a huge problem. And the government of Canada would not accept his report, would not allow him to continue further studies, and in fact turfed him from the public service as a result of his information and the fact that he insisted on continuing to talk about it. So there was a lot done to cover this up, and that's an aspect of this story that really needs to be investigated. And the fact that there are still church records that have not been revealed, that have not been made available to the National Center or to us at the TRC that related to this is also a sad commentary on the lack of the commitment by the Catholic Church to allow us to investigate this further. And so we need to have that question looked at as well. I understand in British Columbia, I got a call early this morning, in fact, that the RCMP now have declared that there is a major investigation that's going to occur into the bodies that have been located in Kamloops, and they are now beginning to question those who have made this story available. And unfortunately, in typical heavy-handed and ham-handed police way, they are simply intimidating people rather than helping them. And I think that we need to have a discussion with the police about how they're handling it, because they should not be pursuing those who are revealing the information. They should, in fact, be looking at and looking for those records. They should be looking at what it is that we do know, as opposed to trying to pursue witnesses. The young lady who was the one who did the research on the ground penetrating radar, for example, is quite scared of the approach that the RCMP have taken with her, and I don't blame her. And my advice to her and others has been to make sure that she has legal counsel available to her so that she is not mistreated going forward. We have a huge task still remaining with us, and we identified that as a remaining task in the work of the TRC. And I think that we need to see that in order for us to deal with this properly, we need to ensure that there is an independent study that is done into that question of those burial sites and where they are and what the numbers are going to tell us. And that investigation should not be conducted under the auspices of the federal government, but should be overseen by a parliamentary committee that will ensure that it is done in a proper way. as opposed to having anyone within the Justice Department or the Department of Indigenous Affairs controlling that process. And I would encourage you to think about that as we go forward, because I think that there are still many questions that remain to be answered. I think that it's not only survivors of the schools that need to know this, but also the survivors of those who work in the schools also need to know what happened, because this is hurting them as well. And several of them have reached out to me about how much anguish they are feeling over knowing that their grandfather, grandmother, or their father or mother worked in the school, and they didn't know or never talked about it. If they did know anything, and they want to know what they can do to help them as well. So I'm sure that you will have lots of questions for us, so I'll leave it at that. I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Clerk, I see we have other witnesses joining us. Technically, are we capable?
I'll ask Ms. Wesley Esquimo to introduce herself and where she's calling from, and I'll be able to give feedback accordingly.
Hi, sorry I'm late. Cynthia Wesley Eskimo. I'm from the Chippewa Georgina Island First Nation and the chair of the National Center of Truth and Reconciliation.
I think we'll be able to proceed, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wilson, could you go ahead now, please, with your testimony?
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And I do want to acknowledge the committee. And if I may say, Chair Bratina, I also honor your expressions of remorse and what you shared with us very personally about your wife and that conversation. I think that speaks to our shared humanity as we come around this issue. I want to acknowledge Deputy Minister Watson as well. I'm coming to you from Treaty 8 territory, the peoples of the Dene Nation. And I know Daniel lived here, but also worked with us and paid attention to us throughout the work of our commission. And I also want to acknowledge my fellow commissioners, and good morning to you both, and good to see you both. And thank you very much, Chief Littlechild, for your very personal sharings as well. And I acknowledge our NCTR relatives, and I refer to them in that way because in speaking of them, the existence of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation was something that our commission gave birth to as part of our mandate with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And they carry on the very important and reverent work of safekeeping of all that we learned and all that was given to us by way of teachings and material effects during the commission. I also want to acknowledge any survivors or intergenerational survivors who may be in the room or on this committee or joining us in other ways, and whose voices, and I have to say relentless advocacy and efforts, are the ones that have brought us to this time and place. And finally, and most particularly, I want to acknowledge and honor all those across the country who are grieving and who are at the same time feeling expressions of feeling validated for all that they have told us and all that is beginning to be heard. I was thinking, gee, if only I could say happy anniversary, but I know that we're not here to celebrate. And rather, we're here to hold up to the light those things which, in fact, we have known about for years, but have until now denied or ignored or given insufficient attention or resources or the urgency needed for the actions to follow. So what was happening 6 years ago today, 6 years ago exactly yesterday, in fact, thousands of residential school survivors and others from throughout the land were gathered in Ottawa to witness, receive, and celebrate the conclusions of our Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. And we three commissioners stood together to release the summary report of our findings, a full volume of survivors' voices, some of whom talked precisely about this issue, 10 founding principles of reconciliation, and 94 calls to action. And we've already referenced today the ones in the 70s that are particularly about this, but there are other calls to action that are interrelated, such as 82 that calls for a national monument, in part to have a commemorative place for the unknown child, those that we haven't yet found and may never find. My part in those final speeches that day was, in fact, about the missing children. So we talked about it a lot at that time, and that was 6 years ago. Well, a few months later, we released our multi-volume full report, and our chair, Mr. Sinclair, has just referred you to volume 4, an entire volume devoted to missing children and unmarked burials. And Commissioner Littlechild has talked to you about the chairs that we had in place, the empty chairs, usually 2 of them, one for all the little boys and one for all the little girls, so that they would be ever present in front of mind in our thinking and in our work. The conclusions in our reports did not come from thin air. They came from historic documents, from new research that was commissioned by us, and from 7,000 recorded voices of former residential school student survivors, each one of them experts on their own lived experiences. What happened to them, what happened to friends and family members, what they witnessed, and those they never saw again. Well, that was 6 years ago. What was happening 9 years ago? In public hearings open to all who cared to pay attention, because all of our activities were public and most of them web streamed, survivor women in Chisasipi, Northern Quebec, entrusted me with this baby rattle, the shishigun, and they conveyed a particular responsibility to me as the woman commissioner, sometimes referred to as the mother commissioner, to do all that we could to find and free the spirits of the missing children. And what was happening 11 years ago, at one of our very earliest TRC events, we sat in a circle in Winnipeg, which included the then Conservative Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and a former chief, imploring us to find their missing relative, one who had never returned home from residential school. And what was happening 13 years ago? Leaders from each and every one of your political parties stood in the House of Commons to offer official apologies for your parties and your respective governments' roles in imposing and perpetuating the residential school system. And very importantly, each one promising to work together to make things right in the spirit of reconciliation. So we are called together again today in what you have deemed an emergency session. And for me, I've been pondering this question: when does the known, when does the atrocious become an emergency? I'm very, very grateful for this expression of urgency. And I am dismayed that it's being framed with the poor language that we have to work with, calling it the discovery of human remains. This is not a discovery, which is why I have reminded you of this history. It is the validation of all that we have previously and repeatedly been told and have been saying. And these are not statistics. We know the number, but these are not statistics. And by the way, they are also not all the children we know to have died at that school. We already did know of 52 in our existing records. These are not statistics. These are little children, some of them possibly now forever unknown, but all of them loved, and none of them now ever forgotten. So what can Canada do? I've tried to wrap my head around what we might offer back as you go forward with your deliberations. Commissioner Sinclair touched on it already, and I think it's extremely important. The continued and sustained nonpartisan response and prioritization of resources needed to do this work, and all that is being addressed under that broad banner of reconciliation. We have repeatedly said that reconciliation is a non-partisan issue. Accountability, so that we hold ourselves up as a country to the international standards and expectations that we would, in fact, and have in the past advocated for other countries, including the consideration of crime and crimes against humanity. I would ask for honest language, that we not make ourselves comfortable with phrases such as a sad chapter in our history. Is it that, or is it a human rights atrocity? Is it a social policy mistake, or in this story, was it a breeding ground for crime and abuse? I want for it to be seen more and more as an issue that is not limited, and with all appreciation for your committee and your focus and your commitment, for which I'm very grateful, but to push for it not to be an issue for Indigenous and Northern affairs. It is an issue of human rights and of justice, of critical importance to all Canadians and to our very principles of democracy. It is for all of government, and I would say all of governments, as we say repeatedly in our calls to action, and the federal government with particular ability and influence to convene across all governments, the convening powers of the federal government. The call to action number 75 in particular is very specific about that many of these residential schools and the burial sites are no longer on church-owned properties or even public properties. Many of them now are in private hands, and there's going to be a need for collaboration among private landowners, municipalities, Indigenous leaders, provincial governments, and territorial ones as well. And then I would ask for transparency and comprehensive reporting. And of course, that flows most easily when you have a comprehensive strategy that has been communicated that we all know about, but so that we can know what progress is being made without having to depend on the government purporting how much it has done without anyone else being well aware of it. I am aware, in fact, of initiatives that are underway within the Indigenous Affairs Department on this file, but has it advanced enough? Has it advanced fast enough? And are people aware of its existence? I think these are things where we need to communicate thoroughly and frequently and in a comprehensive way so we understand how these efforts tie in with other efforts that are all intertwined in our calls to action. And I really encourage you and all others not to limit yourselves to those that are in the 70s. And then I think to act on the obvious. So to take as an example, number 82, that is outside that bundle in the 70s, calling for a national monument to honor all those students who went to residential schools, knowing that it also is intended to serve as the, if you will, tomb of the unknown child, accepting as we must that not all the children that we will find will ever be identified, and will we ever know exactly where they came from and who they belong to. And then I would like to end by saying that I would like us to embrace, without making crass comparisons, the valuable lessons of COVID, where we have shown and proven to ourselves that we know how to give urgent response. We know how to do whatever it takes, whatever it costs, when it has to do with the right thing, when it has to do with us taking care of each other, and when it has to do with making sure that we are living up to the standards that we say we believe in as a country. So I want to end, if I may, where I began, by honoring all the generations of the little ones who were taken from their homes and displaced from everything and everyone they knew, by acknowledging the little children lying in Kamloops. This past week, they have risen up and they have begun to be heard across the country. They have brought Canada to the forefront of international attention, and it's our responsibility collectively, I think, to continue to listen to them and to make every effort to find the others throughout the land who are still missing. I look forward to your questions and conversation. Thank you very much, Masicho.
Thank you so much. And indeed, we would have felt such shame as this committee if we had not reached out to acknowledge the situation and then determine how we will proceed. But thank you so much for the comments that you've made so far. We've also changed the typical format of the meeting, which is 6-minute statements and then rounds of questions, because we didn't want to interfere with the thoughts that you were having that you wish to share with us. And sometimes there's no time limit that you can put on that. So we have one more testimony coming from the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. Stephanie Scott, Cynthia Wesley Eskimo, who would like to speak? Go ahead.
I'll start. I just want to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining this meeting from the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples in the homeland of the Métis. On behalf of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, I want to say thank you and miigwech to the commissioners who I was able to walk beside for many years during the commission. I want to thank the Honorable Chair and the members of the committee for initiating this timely and absolutely necessary study. My heart goes out to the families of the children who perished at the Kamloops Residential School and all the children that did not return home. This is a time of mourning. It's also an opportunity to finally do the work to locate the children who were taken away, never to return home. It's our sincere hope that the Tecumseh to Secwepemc have accomplished in locating these 215 children will be a moment where all Canadians embrace the truth and act with genuine commitment towards reconciliation. We hope that out of this tragedy, we'll see a concerted national action to locate and honor all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children who perished as a result of the residential school system, something that is urgently needed and long overdue. As the former manager of statement gathering during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I heard survivors talk about witnessing the murder and death of children when they were in residential schools. Many parents were never notified of their child's passing, nor were they told where their children were. We continue to hear these accounts at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. The fourth volume of the TRC's final report describes cemeteries as being abandoned and unprotected. The NCTR is a child of the TRC, and we continue to work closely with survivors to ensure our work is guided by their vision and reflects their truth. 5 of the 94 calls to action call on governments and Canadian institutions to collaborate with and support our ongoing work. Call to Action 72 specifically calls on the federal government to allocate sufficient resources to the NCTR to allow us to maintain the National Residential School Student Death Register. Between the work of the TRC and the NCTR, we have confirmed 4,117 deaths of children in the residential schools. Based on the gaps in the records, we have not been able to identify the names of some of these children. The number of children believed to have gone missing is much higher. Record keeping for these schools was nowhere near today's standards, nor were they consistent. Review of the records already in the NCTR's collection is still ongoing, and we will find more children. A significant key in piecing together the evidence remains with survivors and their families. Even today, survivors continue to come forward with accounts of death they witnessed. Many are in unmarked graves, but there are also accounts of bodies that were buried within walls, bodies buried in the hills or by riversides, excuse me, and bodies that were never found after children died trying to escape these schools. These sites are in fact crime scenes, and the discovery at Kamloops has triggered a new urgency in survivors and their families to share their truths while they still can. We do not know what communities will decide concerning repatriating children to their homes. This must be the choice of families and communities. I do, however, want to underscore to the committee the urgency of documenting what survivors witnessed or what families have shared about missing loved ones. We are racing against time. We often hear from survivors that they have fewer tomorrows than they have yesterdays. We know the Kamloops Residential School is one school in over 140 across this country. We are only at the beginning of recognizing the extent of the horrific loss of precious lives. The work ahead is extensive. I feel it is also important for the committee to recognize that at this point, there is no ongoing federal commitment to maintain the NCTR's core funding necessary for this vital work to continue. Since we opened in 2015, we have developed the National Student Memorial Register, created internships with other institutions to expand the digital archives, and create greater accessibility of the truths within the records we hold. We also developed a commemoration and healing fund with the guidance of residential school survivors. In developing this fund, survivors prioritized accessibility because communities deserve to pursue healing and remembrance in ways they feel are appropriate for themselves and without the red tape and cumbersome bureaucratic barriers. I will now ask Dr. Cynthia Wesley-Eskimo, the chair of the NCTR's governing circle, to talk about what needs to be done going forward. Miigwech.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you to the commissioners as well for the work that you've done over the past and the truth that you brought to light. I'd like to thank the Standing Committee as well for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I'd like to say good afternoon. I'm a proud member and resident of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation in Lake Simcoe. Together with the Chippewas of Beausoleil, Rama, and the Mississaugas of Alderville, Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Scugog Island, we're all signatories to several treaties signed throughout the 18th and 19th centuries that covered lands in different parts of southern central Ontario. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the original lands of the Chippewa today. First, I also want to note that both of my parents also attended residential school and spent 20 years between them. My father going at the very young age of 4 years old and actually being raised there, and also suffering the consequences of that through the rest of his life. I think there are two things that need to be done. The first is to finally uncover the truth. And I mean truth with a capital T, because we've had a lot of truth telling. We have not had the final truth. To finally and completely identify all of the children who never return home. Paramount to this step is having all parties to the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement release all of the relevant records needed to document this truth. The second is upholding Indigenous protocols around mourning and ensuring Indigenous communities determine what ceremonies and commemorations are necessary and appropriate to honor the children who died and those who never returned home. For years, the Canadian government denied Indigenous peoples the freedom to practice our sacred ceremonies and cultural practices. The residential school system had a role, if not the largest role, in reinforcing this. Survivors have shared that the residential schools had a detrimental impact on their ability to grieve. It is therefore necessary that communities be supported to bring in knowledge keepers and undertake the ceremonies that were so long denied to the missing children, their families, and their communities. There is an ongoing restoration process that must be supported for our next generations. I want to underline the TRC's call to Action 76, which says that Indigenous peoples must be able to lead in the development of strategies for documenting, maintaining, commemorating, and protecting residential school cemeteries. In the view of the National Center on Truth and Reconciliation, the survivors we depend on to guide us, hiding, damaging, interfering with, or destroying the graves of residential school children must be recognized as a crime and prosecuted as such. In addition, national standards must be put in place concerning the use of investigative technologies, such as ground scanning radar, to ensure the privacy of affected families is respected and ensure any evidence of crimes is not compromised. Finally, all measures to investigate and protect burial sites must be consistent with the rights of Indigenous people in domestic and international law, including the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Yesterday, the Federal Minister for Crown Indigenous Relations announced that previously allocated funding for investigation of grave sites would finally be made available to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation governments and communities. In making the announcement, the minister told reporters that Indigenous peoples weren't ready for the money to be released before this. This is quite simply untrue. The National Center of Truth and Reconciliation, survivors, and our partners have been working within frameworks of collaboration, respect for diverse Indigenous protocols, and adherence to the guidance of survivors and knowledge keepers for many years, as you heard Minister Wilson say. The federal government has been told time and time again that the need for action is urgent. The National Center and Indigenous communities have been desperate to begin meaningful action in locating grave sites, but have been severely underfunded. We've made progress on this journey towards truth, reconciliation, and healing, but more truth, a deeper truth remains. The Kamloops School brings into focus just how much more work we have to do as a country. This is going to require genuine, sustained action by the Government of Canada to meet the obligations required to right this horrific wrong. Survivors have consistently said that before we can meaningfully talk about reconciliation, we must have truth and we must have healing. The Aboriginal Healing Foundation was cut short in its work, and its support would be very appropriate right now. Until we have identified all the children who never came home from residential schools, we will not know the whole truth. Until those children are finally returned to their families and communities, the healing journey will remain incomplete. This is a collective task before us. We must do this in a good way without any further delay. Miigwech for your time and attention.
Thank you, witnesses, for your testimony. We're actually right at the time at which we must end the meeting, and there are many specific technical reasons for why we have to end the meeting. But I'm going to ask each member, Ms. McLeod, Mr. Batiste, Madame Bérubé, and Rachel Blaney, to take 1 minute of brief reflection to our what you've heard from our witnesses today. So, Kathy McLeod, please go ahead. And once again, we don't have time for an interchange, but I do want you to express any feelings that you have as a result of what we've heard today.
So first of all, to the commissioners, it's hard to believe I was with you 6 years ago when the report the ceremony was released. And, you know, there has been some progress, but as you reflected, insufficient attention, resources, and urgency. I represent the area of Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou, and I know that it was known, and you brought an awareness, and this has rocked certainly across the country for people that weren't as aware as they needed to be or should have been. You know, I wish I had time. I would love to explore more the issues around the records and is there anything we can do to compel action? I would be very interested in, you know, the comments from the Honorable Sinclair in terms of the investigation. And I sort of wonder if it's too premature that the work needs to be done by communities for a parliamentary kind of investigation. Unfortunately, we don't have the time. And I just want to acknowledge the incredible burden that you carry hearing the testimony from the very difficult testimony that I'm sure still lives with you to this day. So thank you.
Thank you. Jaime Batiste.
Walaliak dan umsit dilagwayo awalaliok dan umsit gizado. I just wanted to thank you in my language. This has been a difficult week for most of us, but for you, this was your reality for years, listening to this, hearing this, and this emergency meeting was to help us reflect and understand based on your knowledge. And we felt it was important to hear from you as you live this every day. And there's so many questions as Canadians are going through the grief, the shock, the denial, the pain, and both and Indigenous people are going through the same and are triggered, and they're asking why. Why was our language? Why was our culture? Why was our lives so insignificant? And why were we such a threat that this is what we went through? But I think that your reflections have really helped us, and your words and the recommendations continue to guide our work. And we're going to be working hard in this committee to make sure that the recommendations are implemented in full. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madame Bérubé, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Chair, first and foremost, I have to apologize to Mr. Littlechild. It was not my intention to cut him off. I simply wanted to understand what he was saying, because I think it's very important, and I really would like to apologize. And I must say that we are all aggrieved with this news that there were the remains of children found, and there's more. We have in my riding in Quebec many Indigenous communities, and there were many small shoes that were put out to acknowledge and commemorate these children who did not deserve to experience what they experienced. So it was very touching. So I would like to thank you very much for coming. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Rachel Blaney.
I just want to thank everyone here so much for your testimony. As the granddaughter of a survivor and as a spouse of a survivor, my heart is with everyone across this country that had this experience, because I know how hard it is. And I guess what I would say is I wish that all Canadians could see the gaze of my husband when he looks at his children right now. And I want to acknowledge Chief Robert Joseph that told us that even when we are angry, we must carry these beautiful, precious souls in our hands and in our hearts. And remember that as we go through this process, we must send them to the better place so that they can be okay now. And so I just want to thank you for giving all Canadians a pathway to doing this, because until all Canadians carry this the way Indigenous people have carried this since the very start, we will not fully heal. So thank you for your work. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you. And once again, to conclude, Wilton Littlechild mentioned the spirits that are among us. And behind me is the picture of the Eagles Among Us by David General here in Hamilton. And I mentioned early on that through the current pandemic, we were saddened by the reality of people, especially the elderly, passing away with no loved ones near to comfort them. And imagine the fate of these children in a strange place, being overcome by illnesses, dependent on strangers to ease their suffering, if indeed any were there. Tears in their eyes, all alone, feeling unloved as the darkness of death overcame them. So we are here today to tell their spirits that they are loved, and we will not disrespect the memory of those children who were lost. And thank you, everyone. I'd like to take a motion to adjourn. Mr. Pawlowski, Ms. Blaney, all in favor. This meeting is adjourned.